Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Michael Lofton Show here on Reason and Theology. We are talking about several books by the great Dr. Likoudis, especially we're going to be talking about the Divine Mosaic, piecing together Catholic and Orthodox unity, joined by Andrew Likoudis, James Likoudis' grandson. How are you, Andrew? Great to see you again.
I'm good, Michael. How are you?
Doing good. Yeah, I'm excited to
Good.
talk about this. So, tell us a little bit about the divine mosaic and how it touches on questions related to ecumenism. Let's dive in there.
Sure. Yeah. So this book originated basically through a process of exploring my grandfather's legacy.
Hmm.
Some of his lesser known works.
Hmm.
Much of his work has been published, but the essays in this book have they've never been published in a written format. So what I did was I pulled together all of his major essays,
Uh-huh.
uh, compiled them into this book, which is about 500 or so pages,
Hmm.
and set it up, organized it, and obviously got your afterword for this. And
Yeah. Yeah.
Tim Staples wrote the foreword.
Yeah.
So this I would say is probably the largest collection of Dr. Likoudis' essays to date.
So it's really helpful that you were able to kind of take them all together and put them in one place instead of just kind of having them out there, all over. I like that you were able to compile them together. So I really appreciate you doing that.
Thanks. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun,
Yeah.
and I've
Yeah.
learned a ton.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the content. There's a huge part that's related to book reviews. Let's maybe dive
Mhm.
into some of those. What are some noteworthy ones we should be aware of?
Sure. Yeah. So in this book, we have a critique of some of the biggest apologetics books from the Eastern Orthodox side. So we have His Broken Body by Laurent Kleinwerk. We have Edward Sachensky's The Filioque,
Yeah.
and then we have Welton's Popes and Patriarchs. And
Right.
of course, Welton was also he wrote Two Paths, which my grandfather
Yes.
refuted in the Divine Primacy. But this one touches on another big major work of Welton's, which we thought worth addressing.
Sure. Yeah. So let's maybe talk a little bit about those. What are some of the points that he makes? Let's maybe start with Welton. Anything that comes to mind?
Well, so Welton's an interesting case because he's more of a polemicist than I would say a serious interlocutor,
Sure.
which is unfortunate because I think his books get some of the most traction.
Right.
And this book review is in particular, I think my grandfather devoted almost 80 pages to it. So he really breaks it down step by step. He talks about the Petrine question, the Donatists, Pope Leo the 13th, um, which he accuses of misquoting Augustine, and
Hmm.
really they get back to the question, of course, of first millennium primacy, which
Hmm.
I think is the big debate today because we have this new Alexandrian document, and uh, it's created a little bit of turmoil with the way it's worded. I've talked with some scholars, and they say, well, we've sort of compromised on the term of uh, papal primacy hasn't been exercised in the first millennium, um, or yeah, but it's not that papal primacy didn't originate in the first millennium. It's that it wasn't widely exercised. So we've compromised there, and Eastern Orthodox polemicists have taken that and they said, see, it didn't. They're saying it didn't exist in the first millennium. No, that's not what it says at all. It says it wasn't widely exercised.
Hmm.
So
Yeah. Yeah. Pretty big difference between the two.
yeah,
Yeah, I'm actually disappointed with that document and the Chieti document. To be perfectly candid, I don't think that the Catholics presented the strongest material
yeah,
for the first millennium or even second millennium that they could have put forward. So it kind of left me
sure,
scratching my head thinking, yeah, why aren't they addressing this over here and mentioning this? And
Hmm.
I,
Yeah, and it
oh,
seems like they just haven't had access to the literature or something
it
because
I honestly get that impression. It
so
was
I
really
mean hopefully yeah hopefully this I mean putting out these books your book and then this one sort of helps to remedy that going forward.
so. What does he deal with when it comes to Sachensky?
So Sachensky he's always been fair and even-handed to Sachensky even though he disagrees with him. I think Sachensky is probably the most serious of the interlocutors.
Mhm.
um, I would say he likes clean work a little bit more maybe just because he's a little bit more ironic. But Sachensky probably puts out the greatest case for Eastern Orthodoxy.
Mhm.
Just
Well, you know, I think there's some interesting points in the Filioque book from Sachensky. What I was disappointed with is instances like Patriarch Tarasius of Constantinople.
mhm,
He has a very small section dedicated to that,
yeah,
and it doesn't really address some of the biggest and most salient points that Catholics have to offer from that, because it sure looks like Patriarch Tarasius was pointing us to a hypostatic procession, not just an economic procession. He doesn't
mhm,
really seem to get into that in any kind of detail. And so I was very disappointed with his engagement of it, because here you have an ecumenical council
mhm,
that endorses the filioque per filium.
yeah,
And it was understood as a hypostatic filioque
mhm,
by the Pope at the time, who wrote an apology for Tarasius against the Franks.
right,
And it's unfortunate that wasn't really addressed. It's like, look, here's an ecumenical council that seems to be affirming the doctrine of the filioque in a profession of faith put forward by the Patriarch of Constantinople. I think that deserves some serious treatment. For some reason, he just didn't address that, and I don't understand that.
yeah. I, I have trouble with the whole debate, understanding like if we can both admit that the spirit proceeds through the Son, why is it so controversial? Like that's all we have to admit in order to find unity.
Well, I think that some people would just argue that that procession could be economic in nature, and that doesn't really prove what Catholics are trying to prove, which is a hypostatic procession. Or they'll argue it's an eternal manifestation, so an energetic procession
Mhm.
and not hypostatic. But that's not the way Tarasius was understood by the Pope. The Pope
Yeah.
understood him as teaching a hypostatic procession. So the per filium versus filioque on that point doesn't really matter, because it means the same thing. It's either way, it's a um, hypostatic position.
Sure.
Um, so yeah, that's just where I would like to have seen more interaction, and frankly, I just don't see Orthodox really engaging that. But
Yeah.
it I can simultaneously say that Sachensky didn't really address the issue of Pope Agatho's letter sufficiently either, which also teaches um, papal indefectibility in its teaching authority at the
Mhm.
Sixth Ecumenical Council. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And my grandfather actually did a debate, and I think you've probably seen it with was it it wasn't Ubi, was it? It was
I saw it. It was pretty terrible. Not on
yeah,
Likoudis's part, but on Ubi's part. And I
yeah,
actually responded to the silly argument that Ubi brought up about an English translation,
yeah,
noting that this was the suggestion of Agatho, and I showed how absurd that is, because if that's the case, then this Greek term that is translated at the turn of the 20th century in English as suggestion, that would then mean
mhm,
imperial edicts are also suggestions. And I just showed how absurd it is.
right,
And I showed
yeah,
again what the word suggestion meant at the turn of the 20th century versus now. And so to equivocate on this and to build a whole case on an English term instead of the Greek term, I thought was pretty laughable. So yeah, I
yeah,
saw it, and that was where he hung his hat, which showed to me that Ubi basically is a joke.
right. I mean, I think they discussed that point in particular about the term suggestion for It sounded like 20 minutes.
Which was a joke to me. I
Yeah.
couldn't believe this is where he hung his hat, because I'm thinking, okay, so if this is Ubi's strongest argument, you lost. You lost,
Yeah.
because this is one of the worst arguments I've ever heard against Agatho's letter. And if that was your strongest argument, you're done. You're done. That's it. No, nobody should ever take you seriously ever again. His filioque debate wasn't any better either. So, moving forward, let's talk about clinical work. What does Dr. Likoudis have to say about his work? His work is a lot more ironic.
Yeah.
So, what are his thoughts?
I think he likes where clean work is going. The Irenic tone, the focus on communion ecclesiology, sort of trying to. I mean, even if we can't agree on the role the primacy takes, we know that there was a primacy, so we can at least come together on that point and sort of like work it out together as we sort of journey together. Which is the same thing Pope Francis is saying. So I mean, it's maybe idealistic. I think clean work is a little idealistic, but I think that's the only solution moving forward, and we've made a lot of progress in our relations with the Orthodox, especially probably Bartholomew, but I just don't see any other solution coming about until we decide that we're sort of in this together. We can't just pretend we're separate churches. We were never supposed to be separate churches.
That's going to have to mean that we would agree with each other dogmatically, and so it's going to be an issue of working through the dogmas of papal infallibility, papal primacy, and also, something like the filioque, among others.
Yeah. But really, I mean, really the kicker is papal primacy, though.
Yeah, I think everything really hinges on that, right? I mean, if the Pope really does exercise the kind of primacy that we're referring to, then papal infallibility follows from that, filioque, all the other issues, they would follow. So ultimately, that's where we really need to focus. And unfortunately, in the discussions that we've had with the Orthodox in Chieti and Alexandria, we did not do justice to the Catholic position, in my opinion. Let's talk a little bit about models of true ecumenism, which is another theme found in this book. Maybe dive in there.
Sure. So we have, I would say, the four big ones: Soloviev, Christopher Dawson, Aquinas, of course, and then Our Lady of Fatima. Soloviev is an interesting and controversial figure. We all know that there's debates about whether he died Catholic or whether he died Orthodox. And yes, he took communion from an Orthodox priest on his deathbed, but the writings he put out before his death are a clear indication of where he stood. I don't think he was that sort of fragile as a figure to sort of just recant in the last moment without having thought these things through significantly. And he didn't give any indication that he had changed his position on this prior to his death. So I think that much is clear. I like Soloviev's sort of his sort of ethos. He was a very sort of he didn't care what other people thought. He looked a little disheveled. I think someone mentioned they met him in Rome and they thought he was a homeless guy, but he was sort of prophetic, like John the Baptist a little bit. Really like that, and my grandfather's a big fan of his. I also want to say, and he was Russian, so I mean, my grandfather's done a little bit of work on Russian Orthodoxy in particular, and
Hmm.
I think going hand in hand with Our Lady of Fatima, um, and especially today, we really need to sort of focus on this area, um, especially because it's one of the largest sects of Christianity,
Hmm.
um, and also if there can be conversion in that region, I mean, with what the Ukrainian and Russian people are going through, that's a huge of huge import.
Yeah. It seems like there was a fair amount of evidence that would suggest that Sister Lucy had indicated that this conversion that they would experience would be a conversion back to their Orthodox roots. Have you heard of that before?
Yeah, and that's the thesis my grandfather puts out,
Hmm.
and he's supported by Father Joaquin Alonso and Dr. Fastigi, who wrote the foreword.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know who's putting out any other thesis who thinks, oh, it's just a conversion from atheism or something.
Hmm.
But conversion to what, right?
Hmm.
I don't know if um, I don't know if that thesis is just, oh, we're gonna stop being communist and that's the end
Hmm.
of it, right?
Yeah.
Um,
What about Aquinas as a model of ecumenism? What are his comments there?
well, Aquinas is, I think, a lot of people think he's just this systematic theologian who, wrote this high scholastic prose, but
Hmm.
he was a great defender of the Pope. He was, I would say, he was sort of ultramontane in a sense, um, but I mean, I'll look back at his works and I'll look at commentaries on his works, and people like Aquinas was the first person saying, okay, indefectibility and the papacy are a package deal. You can't have the kinds of errors that would compromise indefectibility in the papacy and just sort of separate it and say, oh, it's just the Pope, it's not the Church.
Hmm.
No, indefectibility in the Church stems from the Pope. He is the chair, he is the rock, he is the head. You know,
Hmm.
um, you don't get indefectibility without him. And Aquinas mentioned that, and I think we've adopted his position as a church, uh, and I'm saddened to see that a lot of people today deny indefectibility. They deny a charism of safety,
Hmm.
and they really dismiss Bellarmine too, in
Hmm.
saying, "Oh, Bellarmine, he's not the expert on this one, but he's the greatest ecclesiologist almost in the church's history." Um, so they're saying, "Well, modern scholarship, whatever." It doesn't work for me. It doesn't convince
Hmm.
me.
Hmm.
Um, yeah. So, but I think also Dominicans in general have been uh, really active agents in this process of reconciliation. Um, so Aquinas is one. Um, John John de Fontibus. Some people call him John of the Fountain. It's another. But also, my grandfather wrote this small book.
Hmm. Yeah.
This is
Scholars of the
Dominican,
Sacred. Yeah.
yeah, Dominican theologians in late medieval Byzantium,
Hmm.
and it covers the Dominicans of Paragalata, which was a region right outside of Constantinople, where it was a Dominican house of studies basically, and they were engaging with the Orthodox in Byzantium, sort of translating Thomas's works and proliferating them. And we have the Kydonis brothers in that region doing the same thing. Another big role model and sort of favorite of my grandfather. Uh, and actually, we're gonna be publishing a book on Kydonis in a couple months, also.
Oh, okay. I was unaware of that. Awesome.
Yep.
Well, I mean, related to that is this other one that I have right here in front of me, Unpacking Palimism, a Catholic Critique. Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that one too.
Yeah. This one was a lot of fun. Palinism. Uh, there's a whole range of perspectives on like what the Catholic position is, and then
Mm-hmm.
whether it's even compatible with Palinism.
Mm-hmm.
There's like the formal distinction in God's essence and energies.
Right.
There's other kinds of distinctions, but um, there's like we intentionally included multiple perspectives on that in this volume. So we have
Mm-hmm.
Congar's perspective at the very end. We have Wynandy's perspective, sort of introducing the book, and he takes the most, um, I would say, the most established position, the mainstream position, and then my grandfather also takes his position. Um, but it's complicated because there's the issue of whether God can be, whether his essence and energies can be sort of separated,
Mm-hmm.
and then also what is the Eastern Orthodox position. You know, they can't formalize anything without a council. So what is their opinion at this point? Some of them, Neo-Palamites especially, they treat it as a dogma that Palamas taught this essence and energies distinction. So unless we get past this, this is their biggest stumbling block rather than primacy or the filioque.
Mm-hmm.
And Congar addresses that in this sort of towards the end, where whether or not they hold it as a dogma, it's not really tenable, and so we have to sort of find ways to work around it.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's another one that I have in front of me too that I want to hear your thoughts about. Heralds of Catholic Russia, 12 spiritual pilgrims from Byzantium to Rome. This one was also recently put out, and I think people will really be interested in hearing some of these stories. Tell us a little bit about it.
Sure. This is my grandfather's latest work. He wrote this, I think, in 2016.
Mm-hmm.
It covers 12 figures from, from either Russian or Byzantium backgrounds. Includes my grandfather's.
Yeah, I was going to say, including himself.
Yep. But it's the first of its kind. We have a lot of books about stories from Protestantism to Catholicism, but we don't have this sort of compendium of figures who've made that journey themselves. And it's pretty interesting because a lot of these figures actually knew each other living in Russia, and they would attend each other's like parlor parties and stuff like that. But I think the pressing nature of this book is especially there with what's going on in the region with the war and everything. So I'm really hoping this gets out there. But yeah,
yeah.
Go ahead.
And do you have any other projects that are coming up that you could tell us about?
Well, yeah. So there's a couple things on the radar. We have 2 books. My grandfather's collected works on Mariology coming out in a month or so, and that's with a foreword by Mark Miravalle. And then we also have Ending the Byzantine Greek Schism being reissued, and that one's exciting with a foreword by Dr. Hahn and Emmaus Roads issuing that one. So really excited about that. It's been pretty fast paced. I'm just trying to get these out almost as fast as possible. and we're gonna sort of we're steamrolling this into a bigger project, which I can't discuss all the details, but um, we're gonna be putting on lectures and presentations pretty soon, and
Yeah.
that'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, any other points you wanted to cover here before we end here? Anything else that you also wanted to bring up from the divine mosaic specifically?
Um, well, like what you were saying, I just think at sort of like the highest levels, we really need to do a better job of
Mm,
staying informed and not capitulating too much. I know we do want reconciliation, but
mhm.
we can't compromise our dogmas. We can't just
Yeah,
be promote false Irenicism. Just we have to be irenic,
sure.
truly. But you know, let's
Yeah,
let's
at
do
some
better.
point we have to address the issues of dogma. I mean, I feel like a lot of the discussions that take place, we focus on what we have together in common, and that's fine. But it's like at some point we really have to get down to the differences and determine who's right and who's wrong,
Mhm.
and who needs to bend and who doesn't. And I feel like we're not really having those discussions as much as we should,
Yeah,
at least at the
yeah,
high levels.
right.
um and that's unfortunate. I also think some of the interaction that we have at the high level is very different than what we see online interactions between Catholics and Orthodox. I mean,
Yeah.
those tend to
Well,
be
I mean, for me, it's like we need to discuss dogma, but we need to first establish the common ground. That's important. But
Mhm.
but then we can't get wrapped up in polemics about the dogma because
Yeah.
there's a difference between getting down to the distinctions
Mhm.
and just sort of fighting over whatever triumphalism and beating each other over the head with historical atrocities we committed against each other.
I
You know?
agree. It's hard to find a good interlocutor in Eastern Orthodoxy who's both knowledgeable and willing to be ironic, and have a cordial discussion,
Yeah,
um, and is willing to do so publicly. It's hard to find all of those ingredients together, and so
sure.
I found it discouraging because it's really just hard to have these discussions with the Eastern Orthodox because of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's an
When it,
invitation to
yeah, there you go.
any
Absolutely.
Eastern Orthodox.
I mean, I can think of father, not father, Dr. Di Donato and a few others that I've had on this
Mm,
channel, Father Clinterwork, among others. They've
mm,
been both knowledgeable and ironic and
yeah,
helpful. And so I think that they're out there. It's just that they're kind of the exception rather than the rule. And that's what's unfortunate.
right,
Um, but I imagine we could do better ourselves as Catholics too. So
for sure.
um, anyways, well, yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on and doing this and telling us about these books. I have a link to the Divine Mosaic there in the show notes, and I'll put links to the others as well for y'all to go and check out. Unpacking Palimism, Heralds of Catholic Russia, Scholars of the Sacred, and again, the Divine Mosaic, piecing together Catholic and Orthodox unity, that I highly recommend y'all go and check out. So go ahead and check that link right now and hit the like button while you're at it, and the subscribe button too. More people that you want to see um, be reached with the content here at Reason and Theology, well, you have to do your part. You have to hit the subscribe button so I can reach more people. So go ahead and do that if you haven't already. Andrew, thanks for coming on. Love to have you back on.
Sure thing. Thanks, Michael.
All right. God bless. We'll see y'all
You too.
later. Take care.
Bye now.